what are some of the system has been in place for long of the campaign finance? So there must be some positives to it, right? Are there any?
I think it's fair to say the system is broken, and it's broken in large part because of the U.S. Supreme Court's reluctance to put any limits on what can be spent in campaigns. So the court decision that legitimized all of these unregulated outside groups that I'm speaking of was called the Citizens United decision, was handed down in 2010. So let me just give you a brief summary of 3 eras of campaign finance and their problems and which of these work better. During the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, entities like super PACs did not exist. There were strict limits on what groups could spend independent. There weren't limits on what groups could spend independently of candidates, but there were limits on what they could talk about. And what that meant during that era was that groups could spend money talking about issues. If I wanted to spend money talking about climate change or something like that, I could do that, right? But that was different than spending money telling people vote for this candidate because she will be particularly good on climate change or something like that. So during that era, groups were involved, as I think they should be, but there were limits on their speech. During that era as well, there were no effective limits on what people could give to parties. In 2002, a law was passed called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act that did away with these contributions to parties. So from 2002 till about 2010, contributions to parties were strictly limited, contributions to individuals were strictly limited, and the activities of groups were strictly limited. And this era was, for some people, was an improvement over the prior era because it did away with these big contributions to parties. But it is debatable whether that was a good idea. That is, perhaps it is good for parties to be able to raise large sums of money because parties have a brand, parties have an agenda, parties can make choices about where money goes more effectively than individual candidates. Well, I don't know which of those first 2 models is better, but I think it's becoming apparent to us that giving groups, outside groups, more power than political parties has created real problems in our system. So in terms of what's better, I think a system that gave parties a more meaningful role than they have, which doesn't necessarily mean unlimited contributions, but larger contributions perhaps, a system that was able to provide some measure of public funding to candidates might be good. So in some ways, there's a problem with our court. In some ways, it's a problem with our government that politicians are not good at creating public funding systems that are equitable. It's a problem, again, in most countries that have public financing, that if you ask the people in office to develop a public financing system, often they will develop one that keeps them there and disadvantages those who might wish to run.